Happy Saturday, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how I made this pair of Oogie Boogie ears. I have a bunch of links in the description box down below, including a pattern on how to make the ears, as well as a cut file for these centerpieces right here. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below. Let's get to crafting. Alright, so for supplies, you're going to need this burlap fabric. I got mine from Hobby Lobby. And you're going to need about a half a yard of that. Now we're going to also need some sort of black fabric for the lining of these ears. And then for the bow, I'm going to choose this black satin fabric. You could use green or white. You can, change it up however you'd like. Now I did pick up this high density EVA foam this time from Hobby Lobby. It is 3 millimeters thick and it comes in a roll. Then you're also going to need polyfill. Again, this giant bag is going to get you several ears. I'm also going to use this black yarn as like stitching around the edges of the ears. And for the trim, I'm going to use this black kind of satiny ribbon, but you also could use the yarn as well. And for my centerpiece, I'm using this glitter iron-on HTV also from Hobby Lobby. Then you'll of course need a headband. I'm using a white satin finish headband. And I didn't show it, but you'll also need a small piece of black craft foam, as well as my ear template, which is linked below. Now for the template, there are 2 pieces. I like printing it on a cardstock. That way it's easier to transfer onto my material. There's a piece for the fabric and a piece for the foam. I'm gonna start with the fabric for my ears. And for this, since we are doing a lining fabric, which is this black one right here, I'm only gonna draw the pattern on the black fabric. And this is folded over, so I only am drawing out 2 of these circle shapes. Now I'm just using a regular pencil, so I'm going over it a lot of times. You could also use like a chalk pencil instead to get that line to appear a lot easier for you. Now you do want to space these 2 pieces out just a little bit so you have a little bit of room to work with. And once they are drawn, we're going to just cut out around each of them and just cut out like a square. Now again, because this fabric is folded in half, there's 2 layers right here, I'm ending up with a total of 4 squares with only the circles drawn twice, so because they're up against each other. Now since this is the lining, this is going to be the inside of the ear. When it comes to our burlap, here we only have to basically make 4 squares. I don't need the pattern drawn onto this, so I'm going to just take my black squares and cut out a total of 4 squares here. Alright, now we're going to kind of make like a sandwich with this fabric. We're going to start with one of the black squares, one that I have not drawn the pattern on, and then we're going to place the burlap on top. Now with burlap, it doesn't really matter. There's not a front or a back side to the fabric. If there were, or if you have like a prettier side of the fabric that you like, make sure the 2 pretty sides are facing, because the 2 pieces of burlap that are on the inside touching each other right now are going to be the outside of your ears. And then again, I'll put the final black piece on top. This is the side, this is the piece that has the pattern drawn on it. So I'm going to pin the fabric together, the little sandwich together, so this is going to be the shape that I'm sewing. I'm going to do that again with my other ear, starting with the black square that does not have the pattern, placing over it the 2 burlap pieces with the good sides facing each other if yours has a good side, and then the final black square that has the pattern will go on top, and just pin this again. That way everything stays together when you go to sew. The main thing is just to make sure that all of your pieces of fabric, like they meet up, like the black on the bottom isn't too low, or one of the burlap pieces isn't too low. For this, you're not really going to see the thread, but I do like choosing a color that is matching the fabric, the outside fabric. So I am going for this lighter color, and you will see it on this black fabric, but of course that's going to be the inside. So we're going to stitch along the circle, along the line, and we're going to leave a gap where the pattern is bare, where there's, it stops. We're gonna leave that. We're not gonna sew there, because that is gonna be where we're gonna flip this inside out, and then that's also where we're gonna stuff the ear. So when I go to sew, because this is a thicker material, like burlap is a thicker woven material especially, I am going to backstitch at the start and the stop of my ear. A lot of times I don't, simply because I will go back in and hand sew it closed, and then of course glue it onto the headband as well. So it's getting lots of support in staying closed. But with this, since it is a woven textile, I do like backstitching, just that way I don't have to deal with any frays. There's still going to be some fraying because it's burlap, but this will kind of keep it together a little bit more. Now, if you saw my last tutorial, which it was Winnie the Pooh ear, where his face was what we were sewing right here, his head, this is a lot easier of a shape. However, this is still a circular shape, as opposed to, straight lines. So you do have to kind of rotate your fabric as you're sewing and kind of steadily move it to the same speed as your sewing machine is pulling the fabric through. So don't go super fast when you're sewing this. This footage isn't sped up right here. This is as slow as I'm going. You want to go slow and slowly turn your fabric as your sewing machine, as the foot pedal, as the foot is, feeding through the fabric, stepping on the fabric. You just kind of keep going in a smooth manner. You also want to make sure not to force your fabric or pull your fabric in any direction, because you can, of course, break your sewing needle or mess up your machine. So it's a fine balance of moving with the sewing machine, and that's why you want to go slow as well. Now that our ears are sewn, I'm going to cut the excess fabric off. However, I'm going to leave extra fabric here at the close right here. That way I have some fabric to fold over when we go to sew these closed. Don't worry about getting super close to your seam. However, the more fabric you leave, the bulkier it is, especially with these ears. So you do want to get pretty close and again leave some excess at the end. Now it's time to flip it right side out. I always say inside out, but technically this side right here is the right side. So we're gonna flip it, and I just kind of work my finger along the seam to push the fabric out. Now this, of course, it's burlap, so it's a sturdier, it's a thicker fabric. You do have to kind of play with it a little bit more than you would a cotton or a silky fabric, but yeah, you just keep working on it and pushing it through. Now, one of the other things with burlap is that it does shed a lot. You could wash your burlap first. I've heard that helps the fibers come off, and then you'll have less shedding. Also, what I've done in the past, however, is just use hairspray to kind of keep it all together. Now it's time for the foam centerpieces. Now in this one I'm using 3mm thick foam. I have used 6mm thick foam, that's what I usually use, and in those cases I use 2 of these. This time I'm going to use 3. Now it really doesn't matter how much you use, just keep in mind that this is what's providing the stability for your ears. So you don't want to use just one, especially with this 3mm, or even if you were to use 2mm. If you use just one, it's not going to be very stable. That's pretty thin. So the more you add to it, the more structure you're going to give your ear. However, you don't want to add a whole lot, because this does add weight to the ear, and also like Like if you used a super thick one, like I usually use two 6mm ones, so I could use a 12mm, you know, they come in different sizes. But if you get too big, you're gonna end up seeing the ridges of the foam, like the flat edges of the foam when it's put in your ear. So really, it doesn't matter how much of this you use. You just want to use enough that you give your ear enough support while not weighing it down too much. Now for these shapes, I am using the foam cutout of my pattern. This is also the first time that I've used a rolled foam, so you'll see me, you know, working with it, trying to get it flat. I definitely would recommend cutting out or even just flattening the whole roll, either cutting it down into pieces or flattening it, the entire thing. It is easy to flatten, but since this is like a fresh roll, this is a pretty, you know, it is curved. You can see it kind of warping. So I will continue to play with it and flatten it down throughout the whole thing. Now this is totally personal preference, but I like to use the X-Acto knife to cut this curve right here. I find that it's the easiest and fastest way to get this nice curve. Now this curve, like I said, this is the structure of your ear. So this is going to be where the headband meets up to your ear. So you do want to get right on the pattern, right on the line. I have tried to use the X-Acto around the entire circle, and for some reason the rest of the ear is a lot harder to get with the X-Acto, and it's just easier to use some scissors on that part. Once the pieces are all cut out, now it's time to stuff the ear. So I'm going to do 3 to each ear. And because this is, of course, we have our liner, I'm going to go in between the two black layers of fabric. I do find that it's easier to get the foam pieces inside of it if you fold it in half first and then kind of feed it through. But you just kind of have to work with it a little bit. Next, it's time for polyfill, and now the polyfill is going to go on either side of the foam. Like it's going to go in between the foam and the black fabric on each side. And the amount of polyfill really depends on what you want, what look you're going for. They can be not very much polyfill. You could just not even use polyfill at all. But even though the polyfill is very light and airy, the more you put in it, it is going to add bulk and weight to your ear. It might not seem like a lot, but when you really pack it in there, a little bit quickly adds up in weight. So that's just something to keep in mind and play with as you stuff them. Once you're happy with them, now it is time to close up this little gap. To do that, you in actuality could use hot glue, but I like to use some thread and a sewing needle. Now I'm gonna fold over, I'm gonna take one side of the ear and fold it into the other side. So you see I'm stuffing it through there, and then this other edge I will just fold over a little bit and then fold over again. So that way it's, kind of creating like a little seam. And then that is where I will go in and stitch that closed. Now with this stitch, it doesn't have to be super tight. It doesn't have to be really extensive. It is going to be reinforced with hot glue when it goes onto, when I put it onto the headband. So it doesn't need to be a super tight stitch either, but we are going to just want to fully close all the way down the line. And of course I'll do that again with the other ear, fold this end over and then tuck this in and then fold it once more. And then of course that is where I will sew along. I find that when I do this like folding way, that it helps the fabric not bunch up along the curve.
I don't think that would really happen so much with the burlap because, of course, it's thicker, but I have had that happen in the past with like cotton fabric. And I find that by kind of purposefully tucking it and folding over this, it eliminates some of that gathering where I don't want it to be. Now, to emulate Oogie Boogie's like stitching on his body, I'm going to take some yarn and I'm going to stitch along the outside seam. Now, you could go a few different ways around this. You could cut little pieces and hot glue them. I like to sew them with a like really thick sewing needle. It is kind of hard to like get the yarn through. I have to use like a guide right there to get it through the needle. And it is kind of hard to get the knot through both the burlap and mostly through the black fabric. But I think that this is the best way to go about doing that. So I've just knotted one end of the yarn to the other, and I'm going to stitch through this. Now, of course, this doesn't have to be perfect. He is not perfect, so I'm not worried about like perfectly spacing out these stitchings. And I also kind of vary them. So some are going to be curved, some are going to be a little bit more straight, and others will be kind of crossed. I kept changing my mind for how I was doing this. Like if I would just go through the burlap on each side a little bit. It doesn't have to be uniform, no matter which way you decide to do it. Like that time I went all the way across. And so just play with it, have fun. This is kind of one of the areas where you get to be, creative, I guess, with it, as creative as just stitching along the side is. But this is where you kind of, get to add his character in a little bit. And on each end, the starting and stop, just leave a little bit of yarn at those points. Those are where, when I attach it to my headband, I make sure that it's tucked in when I add in the hot glue. So it will get, sealed off, like it will get stuck there rather than making a knot or like properly finishing the stitch. I just left a little bit of extra and then tucked it in before I put on the hot glue and attach it to the headband. Moving on to my bow, of course you could do these ears without a bow. I am doing a bow, so I'm going to use this black satiny fabric, and I'm going to cut a 9 by 12 inch rectangle and then another 2 by 4 inch little rectangle. This is going to be the larger piece is for the main part of the bow, and the smaller rectangle is going to be for the center of the bow. Now with both pieces, I'm going to take the shiny side of the fabric and fold it over itself and fold it hot dog style just until the edges meet, and then I'm going to pin those sides down. That is the side that I'm going to stitch along. And then I'm going to do the same with the smaller rectangle. So for both of these, the good sides are touching each other. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew this with black thread, and I'm going to sew right down that line, like I said. And you can backstitch, you don't have to, but it's just a straight, simple stitch. And then I'll repeat that on the smaller rectangle as well. So right down here, all the way until it's closed. Now on the long piece, I had a very small seam, so if I didn't, or if you end up with a larger seam, go ahead and cut it down just to make the bow less bulky. And then we're going to flip it inside out, or right side out. So now we have a tube, and obviously the outside that you're seeing right now is the good side of the fabric. Now I want to flatten the fabric a bit and make sure that the seam that we just made is on the center of the rectangle. And I'm gonna flip that. So now I can fold it in half. And now this new edge is where I'm going to sew. And this will end up being the inside of the bow. So that's why you want that seam we made to be on the outside right now, so that we're basically making like an invisible seam. I'm not sure if that's the proper terminology for that, but that's basically what we're doing. Now I'm going to sew right along this new edge, and this one I do back stitch because I want to really keep those edges together. And just again, sew right down the edge. Now this time I do have a little bit more of a seam, so I'm going to cut the excess fabric off right here, as well as my loose threads, and then flip it inside out again. And then here is the basic shape of our bow. Now I'm going to, in order to make the bow to attach the center, I'm going to use, I like to use a rubber band, and I'm gonna accordion fold this. So I like, it's kind of hard to explain here. I like to fold it away from me first, and then you just work it towards you, and then fold it away again, and then fold it towards you. And these are creating the ridges of the bow. But at the top and at the bottom, I like the fabric to be folded away from me. I think it just makes the bow look a little bit better. And then you just tie it with the elastic. So I like using elastic to make the bow, because then I can play with it here. Like you can see, I'm kind of refining the lines and also where the center is as well. I'm taking, basically I've done it where you sew it, and sometimes I sew it and it's off to the side a little bit. This way I don't have that issue. So for the centerpiece here, you need to flip it inside out. And the easiest way that I found to do that is by using the end of a paintbrush. Now this is a satin fabric, so it's super easy to turn it inside out, which is very helpful. There's some fabrics that are really difficult to get it to flip. And then I'm going to decide which is going to be the top or the bottom of my bow, and I'm going to attach it. So I start with the bottom part, just a little bit of hot glue, and then attach that bottom and then wrap it around. I also like to then cut off the excess. Like this is a lot longer strip than we need. So once I kind of know where the end of this needs to be, I'll cut it and then hot glue it down. And then also, because this centerpiece it's a tube, I like to also add a little bit of hot glue right to the inside, so that way when I go to put it on the ear, like it doesn't gape open right there. So this little dot of glue, see that little hole right there? This little dot of glue will help close that and just kind of keep the bow together a little bit more. Now it's time to put them together. So for this, I just kind of eyeball it. I make sure that the headband is straight, and it is helpful to have this grid behind me. That way I can kind of make sure it's even on both sides where the ears start. And I just kind of see what looks best. Now I can, if anyone wants, I can make a template for placing these as well. So if that would be helpful to you, let me know in the comments. And here, remember I said we have that extra little bit of yarn. I try to make sure it's tucked in when I hot glue it right here, while also trying not to stick myself with the hot glue. But yeah, I just want to tack that in a little bit and then use the hot glue, attach it. Now my favorite hot glue to use for this, for any of these projects really, is Gorilla Glue. It is the strongest hot glue that I've found. And especially for something like this, we're not using a whole lot of hot glue. There's really only a few spots that it's attached with the hot glue. So it's definitely worth using the Gorilla Glue rather than just a regular glue. Next up is the trim. Now for this, you definitely could use that yarn. The yarn is also a little bit thicker than what I'm using here, but I kind of like the shiny finish. It kind of ties it in with the bow. So what I like to do for this when I'm making them with the bow is I'll start underneath the bow right here, and I'll loop it, I'll run it all the way along the entire ear, and then it'll end up finishing right underneath the bow on the other side. That way you don't have any edges sticking out. Obviously you can't do it that way when there's no bow, but I do like to hide the start and stop points with the bow a little bit. Now for this, all I do is just add a little bit of glue right along where the seam is, right along where they meet. And this is, first of all, this is finishing it up, making hiding any of the glue, but this also is providing a little bit more security for your ears. Like it's getting, there's more glue now being attached and holding them in, as well as another piece of material that is also reinforcing that bond. Now along the back end, I also do the same thing with the bow. I'll stick a little bit of glue right there and then attach this ribbon to it. And here again, that is just reinforcing the bow, giving it a little bit more stability and bond with the hot glue and the headband. That way it doesn't come loose or doesn't come off. Mine are really, really secure. I haven't really had any issues with them falling off or them ripping off. Like even the ones that I've gone in and redone, it really takes a lot to rip these off. So don't worry about them not being secure when you're in the parks or anything like that. This is, especially with that Gorilla Glue, they're really stuck on there. Now at this point, the ears are basically done. However, I do like to include a little foam centerpiece in the middle of my bow. And so that's what I'm gonna do next. Now these files are available down below, and I do have them linked for you. They're totally free. Now I have two files for this cutout. One that's going to be the foam, which is going to be the whole outline of him, and then one which is going to be this made out of this HTV, this glitter iron-on, that is going to end up being his face with his eyes poking through. So I'm going to start with that first, the HTV. Now the thing to remember with HTV, you always put it shiny side down, and then you always mirror it within the Cricut. And so once this cuts out, this is just a regular used glitter iron-on cut pressure. And for the foam centerpiece, this is just 2mm craft foam, and but I'm gonna use a knife blade. Now you probably could use a deep point blade, and you also could cut this shape out on paper or cardstock and trace it onto the foam and then cut it out, because it's not that complicated of a shape. But I like using a knife point blade because it's the easiest. The thing to remember with this when you're putting foam through a Cricut is to move the rollers out of the way. That way you don't have, if the rollers went over your foam, it would leave an impression on the foam. So I move those out of the way, and then I also here go to edit and then move the shape over a little bit. because if you saw my material, I had moved that over to avoid those rollers at the start of it. Now for cut pressure for this, I am using tooling leather for 2 to 3 ounce is what the setting is. Now this will make it, it'll do like 4 passes of the shape, and I stop it at 2. It only needs 2 passes in order to cut through this thickness of foam. If it were to do 4 passes, like I've accidentally forgotten to stop it before and it's cut through my mat. So you don't want to set this to print or to cut and then walk away. Also, there is a little window that'll pop up that'll say like 1 out of 4 passes, and don't go off of that. You have to just kind of sit and watch it and make sure you catch it when it stops. It also does make a noise, like a stop, when it has completed a pass, so you can kind of catch it. And now there we have a little silhouette of Oogie Boogie. So next I'm going to weed out the iron-on and then heat it onto the foam. Now this is also thick or a thin foam, and when you use heat on it, it will try to warp. So what I've found that to prevent that is to iron on, to heat the iron-on onto it for the full amount of time that it needs, and then immediately go in with an ice pack to cool it and hold it. So the foam will kind of start to warp, and then I go in with the ice pack to cool it down and flatten it back out. Also with this, it is, you basically have no overhang, so you want to make sure you watch where you place the vinyl to keep it really in line with the black foam as much as possible. And for whatever vinyl you're using, make sure you use the appropriate temperature and pressure and time to transfer over whatever heat transfer vinyl you're using. You also could use just regular vinyl. I've used that in the past. It might come off or start to lift depending on what kind of vinyl you used or how complex of a shape it is. So just keep that in mind. I have used just regular vinyl before, and also I have used hairspray to adhere it as well, the regular vinyl. So now that it is ironed on and cooled off and flat, now I can remove the transfer, and here we have a little Oogie Boogie. Now this I will adhere to the center of my bow. I kind of like to line it up and then see where it's going to meet, and then that's where I'll put the glue, because as you can see, like, he's bigger than that centerpiece right there, so I kind of place him and then know where to put the glue and then attach him. Now you also, if you were not doing a bow and you still wanted to include this little piece, you could put it on one of the ears. I've done that before with another design where they didn't want the bow. I've put it over on one of the ears, and actually I think I made it a little bit bigger too, but you definitely could play around with it and of course make these your own. And then that's it.
Thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow us on TikTok and Instagram as well. And leave me some suggestions on what ears you want to see me do in future videos. I'll see you in the next one.